All right, welcome back. This is going to be lesson 25, really just two concepts that we're going to cover in this lesson. Your book has three, but that third one, we really have already covered it, so I'm not going to worry about it. In this lesson, we are talking about factoring monomials, so we're just factoring one thing out. And then also we're going to talk about cancellation. You can't learn cancellation until you talk about factoring monomials. So an example of this would be, we have 4ax squared plus 4xy. And with factoring, what we are doing is we are taking out any factors that they have in common. Something good to remember is when we're talking about factors, we are talking about multiplying, because the parts of a multiplication problem are factor-factor product. So in this case, with 4ax squared, we have a factor of 4a, x, and x. And then in this one, we have 4x and y. So with this process, step one, we're going to take out whatever our two terms have in common by dividing them out. So the thing that they have in common is they both are divisible by 4. Step two is I'm going to write what is left after dividing in the parentheses. So if I'm dividing this part by 4, all that is left is ax squared. And then the sign does not change. And then in the second part, 4xy divided by 4, all that's left is going to be xy. So this is factoring monomials. So let's do some more practice. Okay, so in our next example, it's a little bit bigger. There's going to be more factors that our two terms will have in common, some more work to do. But again, we're going to start with finding what do they have in common. So both of these numbers are divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide out a 2. I also see that they both have one x in common. They both have at least x. This one has x squared, this one has just x. They also have p squared because this one has 2 and this one has 4, so they both have at least 2, and they both have at least 1k. So that is what they have in common. But remember, I am dividing these out, and now I'm going to write what do they have left in the parentheses. So 4 divided by 2 is 2. X squared divided by x is just 1x, so just x. P squared divided by p squared is p to the 0, so we won't write anything because it's 1. And then k divided by k is 1, so we're just going to leave all of that alone. So all that we're left with for this first term is 2x after dividing out the greatest common factor. The minus sign isn't going to change. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then k squared divided by k means we're just going to have 1k left. P to the 4th divided by p squared means I'm going to have 2 p's left. And then x divided by x is going to be 1, so I'm going to leave that alone. So this is what our problem will look like after we factor out the greatest common factor. And so that's it for this part. Let's do one more practice problem before we start talking about cancellation. So in this example, we have 3 terms. We have a trinomial. But we're still going to look and see what all 3 have in common. And so starting with the coefficient, the number, I see that 4, 2, and 10 are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to divide that out. So we have 2. Then I'm going to ask, how many x's do they all have in common? They all have at least x to the first. And then they all have at least y. So now we're going to write what is left. And 4 divided by 2 is 2. X squared divided by x is just x. And then y divided by y is 1. So I'm going to leave that alone. Minus 2 divided by 2 is 1. X divided by x is 1. And y divided by y is 1. So all of this stuff ends up being just 1 because everything, it's something over itself. And that is a concept that can be a little tricky to remember sometimes. So 2xy divided by 2xy is something over itself. And something over itself always equals 1. It's not 0. This middle term does not disappear because it is the same as my greatest common factor. It still has a place, and that place is -1. So let's keep going. And then we have 10 divided by 2 is going to be 5. X divided by x is 1. And then y squared divided by y is just y. So this right here is me factoring out our greatest common factor. With cancellation, a very important thing to remember is we can only cancel if things are being multiplied and divided. If they're being added and subtracted, we can't interfere with that. So if we're given this problem and they want us to simplify it, we have 4x plus 8 divided by 4. What we first need to do is change this numerator to factor out our greatest common factor, which is 4. They're both divisible by 4 and only 4, and we're left with 4 times x plus 2 divided by 4. And when we get to this case, this 4 is not being added or subtracted, it's being multiplied. It's a factor. Therefore, I can reduce these two 4's. If we had the situation of x plus 4 divided by 4, these cannot be canceled out because this 4 is not a factor, it's an add-in. So I have to leave this alone. This whole thing is grouped together, so I can't just delete it because I have a 4 in my denominator. So let's do some practice. Okay, so in this practice problem, the directions above it in your book say cancel if possible. So first thing we're gonna have to do is before we decide if we can cancel, we need to factor out first. So looking at part A, I look at these two terms and I see what do they have in common? And they both have x squared. So if I were to divide out x squared, I will have 6x left in the first part, plus x squared divided by x squared is 1 over x squared. And now that I have taken out the greatest common factor, I see that I can, in fact, cancel. And this becomes a 1, and this becomes a 1. So my answer is just 6x plus 1. That is my answer because of canceling. But this only works if you factor out first. So now let's look at our second example. It says simplify, factor, cancel if you can. But you know, most people would look at these two x squareds and think, awesome, they both have an x squared, I can cancel them. No, you cannot, because this x squared is not a factor, it's an add-in. It is being added to this, not multiplied. This one was being multiplied to 6x plus 1. This is an add-in. Our two terms in our numerator are not like terms. They have nothing in common. There's nothing that I can factor out. So this whole problem, it stays as it is. I can't do anything with it. So that's my answer. It is simplified. I can't cancel it. So that's it. Okay, and that's it for lesson 25. Pretty simple and short and sweet. Shouldn't be anything new for us. This is a concept from Algebra 1. They're just gonna crank this up a notch whenever we talk about factoring trinomials, which comes up in our next lesson. So let's make sure that we get this part down really solid. That way, whenever we go to factoring trinomials, it's a little bit easier for us. I'll see you guys later.